I just want to start by saying that I have never been the type of person who gets caught up in paranormal activity or ghost stories. Even when I was young, those kind of stories seemed completely unbelievable to me, and I could never take them seriously. With that being said, what I'm about to share is something that happened to me a few years ago that pretty much changed that. My mom worked in real estate, which often meant she had to check out houses on her own before bringing clients through them. Most of the time she would do this by herself, but every once in a while she would take me with her. One day, she came across a house that was apparently rumored to be haunted, and so she figured she'd bring me along for the ride. I will be honest, the house itself was pretty creepy. It was completely covered in vines, but I figured that it was not too unusual for an old house to be like that. We went inside and looked around the first floor, and for the most part, it seemed like any other house my mom would take me to. It was still furnished, but it did have that musky smell that a place that has been empty for a while tends to have. The first thing that struck me as a little odd was there was one of those old box TVs playing some black and white World War II documentary, and that made the whole house feel even older and gloomier. Eventually we made our way upstairs to look at the bedrooms. The second floor was set up with one long hallway and 2 or 3 doors staggered along it. The first room was normal enough, but when we got to the second room, we saw that it was completely full of stuffed animals. Not toys, real stuffed taxidermied animals. Even though I thought that it was strange, the room itself seemed fine aside from that. It was actually kind of neat, with nothing appearing out of place. Wanting to get out of there, we went down the hallway to check the final bedroom, which also seemed normal enough. Then we turned around to head downstairs. For some reason, as we passed the second room again, I looked back inside and immediately stopped in my tracks, because now there was a chair directly in the center of the room. We were both positive it had not been there before, because we would have literally walked into it when we were in the room earlier. But there it was, sitting in the exact middle of the room like it had always been there. Needless to say, we got out of that house pretty quickly. It was something so simple, but there really was no explanation for it. I mean, we were the only 2 people in the house after all. So how does a chair randomly move, especially in what was arguably the strangest room in the entire house? I would consider myself a pretty logical person, and the fact that I cannot think of a single explanation for what happened is why I think that house still bothers me all these years later. On a side note, in the few years after we looked at the house, it sold 5 or 6 times, and almost all of the homeowners said strange things happened while they lived there, almost like someone did not want them in the house. When I was 16, I got a job as a personal assistant and cleaning lady for a very wealthy couple who lived in a beautiful mansion on Lake Michigan. It was a great job at the time, but after a while I had to quit because of everything that was going on there. And I'll tell you exactly what I mean. I made $12 an hour as a 16-year-old girl, which felt insane to me at the time. But now I realize it was probably because the homeowners could not get anyone to stay. It also may have been because they were both major asshats, but honestly, I did not see him all that much during the school year, so it was fine. During the summer I worked 40-hour weeks, and during the school year I worked part-time. Most of the time in the school year I was alone in the house. I had a key, an alarm code, and a gate code, so I let myself in and out. In the summer, I had help from a few other employees, but during the school year I was on my own. At first, I loved being in the house by myself. Do not get me wrong, the place was absolutely gorgeous. It was right on Lake Michigan, so I would open all the curtains and let the sun in and blast the surround sound speaker while I cleaned. It was not until I was alone that I started noticing how weird the place really was. Nothing ever felt especially welcoming about it. Sure, it was beautiful to look at, but it was modern, with hard marble and stone everywhere, so it did not feel homey at all. My first strange experience happened one day when I was cleaning in silence. I remember specifically not turning on the music because at the time I had a bad headache, when all of a sudden, the speaker system in the upstairs part of the house switched on by itself. The way the system worked, it could be controlled from a touchpad in the kitchen, and it would play music throughout the house except for the basement and master bedroom. To play music in those areas, you had to go to the touchpad and turn it on there, then sync it to the rest of the house. That is what made it so alarming, because I was the only person there. I walked upstairs to see what was going on and figure out why the music had turned itself on. I looked around and called out to the homeowners, thinking maybe someone had come in without me noticing. But when I went to check, all the doors were still locked, and nobody else was home. I tried to put it down to a mechanical glitch, shut off the music and went back downstairs. Then it started happening more often. Sometimes I would be listening to music, and it would turn off. Other times it would be off and suddenly turn on in a completely different area of the house. I kept brushing it off, assuming it was just faulty equipment. The second story I remember most clearly happened while I was cleaning the workout room in their basement. I never wanted to go into that room. I honestly can't explain why. There was something about it that just felt wrong. It was always super cold and dark, and I always felt really anxious when I was in there, so I tried my best to avoid it. But my boss would get mad if dust built up, so I forced myself to clean it once a week. Well, one day I was in there with a broom and a mop. I remember sweeping the floor and propping the broom against a machine while I used the mop. Suddenly, the broom fell over and hit the wall, the baseboard, and the floor, and as it fell, it made 3 distinct knocks. What happened next scared me so badly that I refused to go into that room by myself ever again. Right after those 3 knocks from the broom, 3 knocks answered back in the exact same pattern. But this time the sound came from inside the wall. I know that sounds like it could have been an echo, but it wasn't. It was not a scared animal either. I know knocking, deliberate knocking. And I was completely alone in a huge, quiet house in the middle of nowhere. And something was knocking back at me from inside the wall. To this day, I have no explanation for it. Lastly, and this was the first and only time I have ever seen something paranormal with my own eyes, and no, I was not being paranoid or crazy because I was with a co-worker who saw it too. Sometimes my boss would rent out the guest house, and we would clean it out before the guests arrived. The guest house had a glass hallway connecting one main part of the house to another. I was cleaning the glass while one of my co-workers, Bob, was standing beside me talking. Then I caught a glimpse of what looked like a boy in a blue shirt running by. I turned my head, just as Bob did. He asked me if I saw it, and I said I did. I later found out that sketchy things happened there before the couple I worked for moved in. There was a story of an abusive father, and everyone in the family ended up having to pack up and leave, and ended up disappearing. The house was left vacant for quite some time, and was a complete mess with kids vandalizing the place and weather damage and such. The people I worked for redid the place and it looked brand new. I wonder if the child I saw and the playful knocking and playing with the music equipment was the ghost of the child who still resides in the house.
The thing that watches from the back window. So I live in Alaska, in a small town just outside Wasilla. It's a quiet place, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and the houses are spread out enough that you get a decent bit of land between you and your neighbors. My neighbor, though, she's a character. Mrs. Harper, late 60s, lives alone in the house next to mine. She's sweet, but she's always had these weird stories about her house being off. For months, she'd complained that someone was staring into her house at night. She said it was happening when she was trying to sleep, but every time she turned on the light or looked out, the figure was gone. I hate to say it now, but I thought she was just imagining it. I mean, she's older, you know? Maybe her vision wasn't what it used to be. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her. She mentioned it often enough that it started to feel like she was just grasping at straws. But then, she told me something that changed everything. One night, she came over to my place. Her hands were shaking, and she wasn't looking at me. She was looking over her shoulder, like someone was right behind her. I figured that she was just scared of the dark or whatever, but then she said it again. "Someone's watching me. Someone's at the window." And she wasn't talking about the usual sense of feeling watched. She was talking about an actual presence, a thing. I didn't know what to say, but that night something strange happened. I couldn't sleep. Hadn't been sleeping much anyway, but this night I felt like something was off. I'm not a paranoid person, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. So I decided to check the back window. Now, my house is old, really old. The kind of house that has creaky floors and windows that don't always close all the way. It's a fixer-upper I've been meaning to get to, but I'd put off work for too long. I went to the kitchen, switched on the light, and looked out the window. I'll admit I was expecting some kind of animal or a reflection to freak me out. The wind had been gusting pretty hard, and there were shadows dancing all around. But then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just some trick of the light, but no. It was a figure standing in the backyard by the tree line, right in the corner of the yard where it was too dark for anyone to get a clear view of the woods. The thing was tall, like unnaturally tall. And the more I stared, the more I realized something was horribly wrong. It wasn't a person. It didn't have a face. It was like the outline of a person, but the space where its face should be was just empty, like it was covered by a deep blackness that didn't match the night around it. I froze. My first instinct was to turn the lights off and back away from the window, but I couldn't move. Something about it felt wrong, like my body just wasn't able to react properly. And then, like it knew I was watching, it started moving, slowly but steadily, toward the house. I'm not sure how long I stood there, paralyzed. It didn't make a sound. It didn't even rustle the grass, but it was coming closer. I felt like time had slowed, like the air was heavier, pressing down on me. And right before I could snap out of it, right before I even thought about running, it stopped. Just stopped in the middle of the yard. I couldn't see its eyes, but I swear it was looking at me. That's when I snapped back into my senses, and I bolted to the back door. I didn't go outside. I didn't want to. I locked every window, every door, and stayed up all night. I didn't hear anything more from it, but I wasn't going to take any chances. Not after that. The next morning, I called Mrs. Harper, but she was already outside. Her eyes were wild and frantic. "Did you see it too?" she asked. I don't even know why I asked, but I did. "What did you see?" And she told me exactly what I had seen. No face, just darkness. She'd seen it too, standing at her window like it was watching her, but she didn't want to tell anyone. I've been in touch with her since, but things have gotten quieter. I don't know if that thing is still out there, but I haven't looked back at the window since. At least not at night. I've kept the lights on just in case, but there's no denying it. There's something out there, and it's been watching us. We can't be the only ones. So, has anyone else had something like this happen? Something that's not a ghost, but more like a shadow with no face? Something that's just been watching you? I'd love to know.
Ages 12, and from ages 7 to 12, we lived in a house in Alabama. It was in a nice neighborhood, and we had woods behind the house, though you could see through them to another neighborhood far away. That part matters, so remember it. I cannot remember the stories in perfect order, but I remember a lot of them. My family experienced things too, and we had so much documentation that we almost had paranormal investigators come out before we moved abruptly. Whatever was in that house was not just one spirit, there were several. From the moment we moved in, everyone else felt something was off, like the house itself was eerie. When we bought it, it was supposed to be worth more than $200,000, but the owners wanted it gone and refused to even walk us through it. He sold it for about $130,000 instead. Here are some of the stories. One night I was asleep, and above my head there was a large rectangular window with a street lamp outside it. The light would shine in and cast reflections on the walls. While I was lying there, I saw a man with a huge top hat walking across my room in the shadows. He stopped in the corner. I waited for a minute, terrified, and decided to check whether it was just someone outside so I could tell my dad. I got up, looked out the window, and there was nothing there. When I looked back at the wall, the figure was gone. Numerous times I woke up and saw white orbs floating around my room. One time my friend spent the night and went home at around 4 a.m. because the door to my room faced our solarium, and in the solarium, she saw an old man sitting in our chair rocking back and forth. She later saw a dark shadow walking down our hallway. My brother's friends came over during the day, and my brother was showing him around. Both of them saw a toddler girl, bloody and crying, disappear right in front of their eyes. He never came back. There was a time I was home alone. My brother is my stepbrother, and his dad had passed years earlier. He had a large box of his dad things, including a jack-in-the-box, which was stored way up in the closet, where there was no way it could have just fallen down on its own. I was sitting in the living room, watching a movie and playing with Barbies, when I had to go to the bathroom. As I walked past my brother's room, I heard something fall. I stopped, terrified. I am sure 3 to 5 minutes passed because I was completely frozen with fear. Then the jack-in-the-box started winding up and going off. I ran into my room, locked myself in, and called my parents. I did not come out for 6 hours, waiting for them to get home. There was another time when it was around 3 in the morning, and my parents were working on a house project. They were remodeling their room and adding a door, so all of us were outside. I was playing in the backyard on the tire swing facing the woods, and I remember seeing 2 huge eyes out there. They were massive. I ran to my dad and showed him. Compared to my dad, the eyes had to have been at least 7 or 8 feet off the ground. He called my brother over and over and asked if he saw them, and he did. He ran inside and hid. I watched my dad move around and change positions to see if the eyes would follow, and they did. A few hours later, my dad and I walked back outside and the eyes were gone. There was a time we had a babysitter and were asleep in our room while she was in my parents' room watching television. She was a good friend of ours. She fell asleep, then woke up to me walking up to the bed and tugging on her. She got up, and I walked into my parents' bathroom while she followed. Then I disappeared. She freaked out and ran to my room where I was asleep in bed. From my parents' bed, you could see down the hallway and out the door of my room, the bathroom, and my brother's room. Well, one night my dad was up around 2 a.m. watching a movie when he saw a figure pop out the door and shine into the hallway. He thought it was me, looked at it, and it disappeared. This kept happening back and forth for about 20 minutes. When he finally got up to check, I was asleep. My dad also saw the old man from the bathroom on our back porch. He ran outside and of course nothing was there, and that happened numerous times as well. We would often hear things at night, so one time we set up a recorder and a camera in the living room. During the night it ran, and when we woke up, there were a few shadows walking back and forth in the hallway, but nothing on camera. On the recorder, however, you could hear a loud organ playing with a flute that went on for hours, then it stopped, just as you heard a shrill scream. We didn't even own an organ, let alone a piano. My stepmom used to cut hair in the house and had her own little salon. One time she was cutting my brother's hair while we were there all hanging out with the radio on, and it suddenly shot up to full blast. We all froze. My stepmom said to turn it back down to whatever had messed with it, and the volume went back to normal. This happened once or twice and then it stopped. Numerous things would fly at you and hit you out of nowhere. You would also hear people when you were home alone, cabinets shutting, the front door slamming, and so on. But there was never anything there. Pets would disappear and never be found, including things like hamsters that had no way of escaping. We found a scorpion once and put a thick glass bottle over it, left it for the day, and 3 or 4 hours later when we came back the bottle was upright and the scorpion was gone. We kept our dogs outside, but we had a mini chihuahua who was sick, so we kept her inside for the day. My parents were at work, and my brothers and I were the first to get home. She was mangled and dead in the room, and there was no explanation as to how. There was also a time we took down the mirror in my parents' bathroom, and a card fell out from behind it, talking about Christianity. We helped carry the mirror and some of the other things out of the bathroom and left the card on the counter. When we all came back, it was gone. Later it showed up under the hot tub in the solarium. I do know that the man I saw in my room with the top hat followed me to 4 different houses, and he currently plays with my 3-year-old while she's asleep. I sometimes catch it on the video baby monitor. That's everything I remember for now. There is one final thing. My stepmom went crazy and told my dad he was psychotic, and then burned everything we had. They have a very disturbing relationship. I'm glad I'm no longer in that house.
The House Still Has My Voice by Rachel G. My parents sold my childhood home last year after my dad retired and they moved to Florida. I didn't think much about it at the time. I'd been living in Boston for 8 years and I maybe visited once a year for holidays. To me, the house was just a house. Then my mom called me in November and asked if I had ever recorded myself as a kid, like audio recordings, home videos with sound, anything like that. I told her, yeah, probably. I mean, we had a camcorder in the 90s, but I don't remember what I would have done specifically. Why? She got quiet for a second. Then she said the new owners had contacted her. They wanted to know if we had left any electronic devices in the house, specifically anything that could play back recordings. I asked what was going on. She said the family had been hearing a child's voice in the house, a girl maybe 8 or 9 years old. Always the same phrases. "Mom, where are you?" And "I'm in my room." And "Can you come here?" The voice was coming from upstairs, from what used to be my bedroom. I told my mom it was probably their kid. I mean, they had kids, right? She said yes, but their daughter was 12 and their son was 15, and the voice didn't match either of them. Plus, it only happened when the kids were at school or otherwise out of the house. The new owners had searched the whole house multiple times. They checked the attic, the basement, every closet, looking for old baby monitors or voice recorders, anything electronic we may have accidentally left behind. They didn't find anything, but they kept hearing the voice. My mom wanted to know if I remembered ever recording myself saying those specific phrases, maybe for a school project or just playing around. I told her I didn't remember. I asked why she was taking this so seriously. She said that she had heard it too. She'd gone back to the house the previous week to pick up some mail that had been forwarded there by mistake. The new owners had let her in, and while she was standing in the kitchen, she heard it clear as day. My voice as a little girl, coming from upstairs, calling, "Mom, where are you?" She said it sounded exactly like me when I was 8. I drove up to Brattleboro the next weekend. I told my mom I was coming, but I didn't tell her why. I wanted to see the house. The new family's name was Peterson. I looked them up on Facebook and sent a message explaining who I was and asking if I could stop by. I said I'd left something there and wanted to check if it was still in the house. Obviously, I've changed their name for the sake of this story. Mrs. Peterson responded within an hour, said they'd love to meet me and I could come by any time. I got there on a Saturday morning. The house looked different. They'd painted the exterior a light blue instead of the yellow that it had been. There was a new mailbox and different shrubs in the front, but it was still recognizable. Mrs. Peterson answered the door. She seemed relieved to see me. She invited me in and immediately started explaining about the voice. She said it had started about 2 months after they moved in, just occasionally at first, once every few weeks, but it had gotten more frequent, and now it happened almost daily. It was always between 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, always from upstairs, and always the same phrases in the same order. "Mom, where are you? I'm in my room. Can you come here?" She said they'd had an electrician check all the wiring. They had someone come look for carbon monoxide or anything else that might cause auditory hallucinations. The mom heard it the most, and Mrs. Peterson said she even got a brain scan to see if maybe she had a tumor or something, but everything checked out fine. Her husband thought she was imagining it, until finally he heard it himself. Tale as old as time, am I right? And then their son heard it. Their daughter refuses to go upstairs alone anymore. I asked if I could see my old room. We went upstairs. The room was completely different now. They'd painted it green and it was set up as a guest room. Nothing from my childhood remained. Not that I expected it to be there. We stood there for maybe 10 minutes. Mrs. Peterson kept apologizing, said the voice usually happened earlier in the day and maybe we missed it. And then finally I heard it. "Mom, where are you?" It came from right next to me, like somebody was standing at my shoulder, a child's voice. And Mrs. Peterson was right. My mom was right. It sounded like me. Not my voice now, but my voice when I was little. "I'm in my room." The same spot. Same volume, like the speaker hadn't moved. "Can you come here?" Then silence. Mrs. Peterson looked at me and asked if I had heard it. I said yes. She asked if that was my voice from when I was a kid. I didn't want to say yes. I wanted to tell her that it was some coincidence or a weird acoustic effect or something, but I couldn't lie. I told her it did sound like me when I was little. She asked if I remembered saying those things. I said, well, yeah, I'm sure I said those things at some point, but I don't know. But here's the part that's been bothering me for months. I do remember. Not clearly, but enough. So when I was 8, I used to play this game by myself. I'd go up to my room and pretend I was calling for my mom, just practicing different ways of getting her attention, seeing how my voice sounded when I projected it versus when I spoke normally. I was a weird kid, okay? I spent a lot of time alone. I specifically remembered practicing those exact phrases, standing in the middle of my room and saying them over and over. Mom, where are you? I'm in my room. Can you come here? I have no idea why I practiced those specific words. It seemed important at the time for reasons I can't remember now. I told Mrs. Peterson this. She asked when I used to do this. I said, oh, probably 1998, 1999. I would have been like 8 or 9. She went very pale and asked if I did it often. I said, yeah, maybe once or twice a week for a few months. It was just some weird thing I did. We stood there in that room, and I felt something I can't quite describe. Like I was standing next to my past self. Like some echo of those afternoons had gotten stuck in that space and was still playing out 25 years later. Mrs. Peterson asked if there was any way to make it stop. I told her I didn't know. I had no idea how any of this worked. I wasn't a physicist or a paranormal investigator or whatever kind of expert you would need for this situation. She asked if I wanted to stay and see if it happened again. I said no, I needed to leave. I haven't been back. Mrs. Peterson emails me occasionally with updates. The voice is still there and it still says the same things. And it's the same voice. She's asked me a few times if I would be willing to come back and to try talking to it. Like maybe if I acknowledged my past self, it would stop. I understand why she wants this. I keep telling her I'll think about it. But if I'm being honest, I won't. I just can't go back there and listen to child me calling for my mother in an empty room. I don't know what's happening in that house. I don't know if it's some kind of residual haunting, even though, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not dead, or if something about how often I repeated it created some kind of an imprint that won't fade. I've heard if there's a lot of quartz in the area, sometimes things you do over and over again can get recorded. I don't really know how that works or if it's true, but I did ask her to check that out. Maybe it'll help. I don't really know. But there's a version of me that's still in that room, still practicing those phrases and waiting for someone to answer. I don't know how to make her stop. And honestly, I don't know if I even want to. I kind of just want to forget the whole thing and move on with my life. But it's really, really bugging me. I don't know why past me is still there, if that's what it is. I don't know if it's some glitch in the Matrix or what, but it just makes me feel really uneasy.
I started dating a girl who was really into the show Paranormal. She had a pentagram tattoo, though when I met her, she didn't really know what the pentagram meant, and just thought it was a cool symbol from the show. At first, everything was great. I got a night shift job at a warehouse, and not long after that I managed to rent a cheap 3-bedroom apartment in the city. I loved the apartment, and I loved her. Things were good between us in the beginning. Once the lease was signed, we moved in. I had 2 beagles, and I had just brought in their food and water bowls. I placed them on the kitchen table, and then the damn thing suddenly shot off the table right in front of me. I had no idea of what to make of it, so I just let it go. It freaked both of us out, but it rattled her more than it did me. Honestly, I did not really believe in ghosts yet. I knew strange things could happen, but I figured there had to be some other explanation. The first major thing I remember involved a brand new towel cabinet in the bathroom. I had just washed about 10 towels and put them all away. The cabinet smelled like fresh cut wood, and the towels smelled of clean laundry. The next day, the whole cabinet reeked of death or something rotten. That scared us, but I still didn't want to jump to conclusions. It could have been anything. The strange part was that the smell was only in the cabinet. It got into my towels, so I washed them again, and by the next day the smell was completely gone. If something had died in the walls, I don't think the odor would have just vanished like that. By then, we had already heard from the upstairs neighbors that the place was haunted. Supposedly, people had seen a 7-foot shadow figure wearing a hat. A friend of hers had seen it and was so freaked out that he would not come near the house again. Whatever was there seemed to have some kind of fixation on my dogs, especially their bowls. One night, I was at work around 3 in the morning when my girlfriend called me in a panic. She stayed home all day and night, so she experienced most of the strange stuff. She was crying so hard she could barely talk. I still remember how scared she sounded, and even now it bothers me. She was in the living room, which was a big open space connected to the kitchen. She was sitting on the couch with the dogs when she heard a knock from the kitchen. My dog, Scout, immediately perked up and started growling, staring into the kitchen like someone had broken in. Then she watched the dog bowl in the kitchen slowly slide across the floor by itself. She froze in shock, but she managed to call me, and I came home and did what I could, which was basically nothing. I put the dog bowl back where it belonged and went back to work. About 10 minutes later, she called again. The bowl had moved once more, so her mother came and collected her, and she stayed elsewhere that night. By the time I got home, the sun was already coming up, and the house already felt less threatening in the daylight, so I just went to sleep. After that, the front patio light began switching on and off by itself. It was unsettling, but at that point it barely even registered as unusual anymore. One of my dogs never seemed to react to whatever this was, but my other dog constantly looked terrified, as if she could see someone else in the house. When the upstairs neighbor was digging through the attic and found a strange note in the belongings of the previous tenants that said, "Murdak is God," I looked it up and found that Murdak was an ancient Babylonian god. I told the landlord that I thought the place was haunted and she admitted it. Great, nice to know before moving in. Not long after that, my ex started hearing voices too. She said a man whispered in her ear from behind her while she was in the bathroom. She heard my voice calling her when I was asleep in another room, and there were footsteps moving around the house. And one night, a table flipped over in the living room while I was in bed. I came storming out ready to hit some burglar, only to find the table lying on the floor and nothing else. Whatever this thing was, it felt deeply negative. It was not just some random ghost messing around. It felt aware. It seemed to know how to push people and build tension. When things were going well between us, the activity would spike. When we were already fighting, it would go quiet. It felt like the house wanted to stay tense and miserable. From the first day I moved in, I had this constant feeling that someone invisible was watching me, and it was hard to shake and never felt normal. Then the nightmares started, along with the scratches. Every single night, I had brutal night terrors, violent dreams about people I loved dying or people getting hurt in awful ways. I would wake up covered in long, red scratch marks. I would wake up sweating, shouting and shaking because the dreams were so intense. I honestly cannot remember the last time I had a nightmare before that apartment. The good news is that since I moved out, the nightmares stopped. A little later, I had an important work meeting that I could not afford to miss. I planned to leave an hour early just to be safe, and then my keys disappeared. I searched everywhere. As the clock kept getting closer to my shift, I started to freak out. I never lose my keys, and by that point I was tearing the apartment apart. I pulled the cushions off the couch, and still I couldn't find them. I left the place in a mess and got the neighbor to drive me to work. When she came back later to pick me up, she put the cushions back on the couch and went to the bathroom. She heard a bang, came back, and found my keys sitting neatly in the middle of the couch cushion she had just replaced. That was when I realized this thing was not just weird, but calculating. It knew exactly what it was doing. If I had missed work, I would have lost my job, and it chose that day out of all days to do it. There was also this other detail that fits the overall feel of the place. The upstairs neighbor's boyfriend was a deadbeat who never worked, spent all day doing drugs and lived off her. Years earlier, he had killed someone over the last bit of acid he had, and it was ruled manslaughter. He served time and got out. A week after we moved in, my girlfriend caught him staring through our window at her, which is creepy as hell. Then I learned that the house to the left of our house and the house to the right were owned by the same family. Apparently, all three were haunted. To make the long story short, the relationship eventually fell apart. She left me. It had become toxic, and honestly, it was probably for the best. I don't blame her for anything. I know I messed things up myself, but the house added stress on top of real-life stress, and I believe whatever was in there fed on that tension, because when things were good, it stirred everything up, and when things were bad, it seemed to disappear.
The basement in that Ypsilanti house had something living in the walls. By Keith W. I do HVAC work in the Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti area in Michigan. I've been doing it for about 12 years now, mostly residential service calls and installations. You go into a lot of houses in this line of work, and you see how a lot of different people live. You see the weird stuff they keep in their basements and crawl spaces, and after a while, nothing really surprises you. What happened in that house on North Huron Street still bothers me, though. That was back in March of last year. I've done maybe 300 basement jobs since I started, and I've never walked off a site before, but I walked off that one. The service call came in on a Thursday. Furnace wasn't working, house was getting cold, standard emergency call. The dispatcher gave me the address, and I headed over around 2 in the afternoon. It was one of those old Ypsilanti houses, probably built in the 1920s. 2-story, needed paint, small yard, standard fare really. The woman who answered the door looked exhausted. She said that they had just moved in 2 months ago, and the furnace had been acting strange the whole time, but now it had quit completely. She led me to the basement door. It was one of those old wooden doors with the original hardware, really heavy. She opened it, and I could immediately tell the air coming up from down there was wrong. It was way too cold. Basements are usually cooler than the rest of the house, but this was like opening a walk-in freezer. She noticed me hesitate and said, "Yeah, it's been like that since we moved in." I asked her if the previous owners had said anything about the heating system. She said the house had been empty for almost a year before they bought it, some kind of estate sale situation. The inspection had flagged a few issues, but nothing major with the furnace. I grabbed my tools and headed down. The stairs were steep and narrow, wooden treads that creaked. The basement was unfinished. Concrete floor, stone foundation walls, exposed joists overhead. There was a single bulb hanging in the middle of the space. It was one of those pull chain fixtures. I pulled it, and the light came on, but it was pretty weak. 40 watts maybe. The furnace was against the far wall. I could see it was old, probably original to the house. I walked over and started my inspection, and that's when I noticed the scratching sounds, very faint, coming from inside the foundation walls. They were rhythmic, kind of like something was moving around. Now, old houses get mice. Sometimes they get rats, and I've dealt with that before, but this did not sound like rodents. The pattern was too wrong. Usually mice sound frantic. They kind of skitter and then stop, and then skitter and stop. This was slower. I tried to ignore it and focus on the furnace. I checked the pilot light first. It was out. I checked the gas line, the thermocouple, the usual suspects. Everything looked fine mechanically. I tried to relight the pilot, and it wouldn't catch. I tried 3 different times. Each time the flame would start, and then go out immediately like something was blowing it out. The scratching got louder while I was working, and it had moved. Now it sounded like it was coming from the wall directly behind the furnace. I stood up and put my hand on the stone. It was like touching a block of ice. It was way colder than it should have been, even in an unheated basement in March. I went back upstairs and I told the woman I needed to check a few things and that I'd be back down in a minute. I wanted to see if there was any obvious source for a draft that might be affecting the pilot light. She said the basement had always given her a bad feeling and that her kids wouldn't go down there at all. Her husband thought she was being ridiculous, but she said she just couldn't get rid of that feeling. I went back down with a stronger flashlight. I wanted to inspect the foundation walls and look for cracks or gaps. I started at one corner and worked my way around. The scratching had stopped. The basement was completely silent, except for my footsteps on the concrete. I was about halfway around the perimeter when I found the section of wall that looked different. The stones there were darker, stained almost. There was something that looked like old mortar repair work, crude patches, like someone had sealed something up in a hurry. I moved my flashlight across the area, and that's when I saw the gap. There was a space between 2 of the stones, maybe an inch wide. I could feel cold air coming out of it. I crouched down to get a better look, and I could see that there was a hollow space behind the wall. Not just a gap in the foundation, like an actual void. I heard breathing coming from inside that space. Slow, wet breathing. I stood up fast and backed away from the wall. My logical mind was telling me that it had to be some kind of animal, maybe a raccoon that had gotten into a crawl space somehow. But I've heard lots of different animals breathe, and this didn't sound like any of them. The scratching started again, right behind where I had been crouching. Aggressive scratching now. Faster, like whatever was in there knew I'd found it. I grabbed my tools and went upstairs. I told the woman I couldn't work on her furnace, that she needed to call a different company. She asked me what was wrong, and I said I just wasn't comfortable with the conditions in her basement. She started to ask more questions, but I was already halfway to the door. I sat in my truck for a few minutes before I left. I called my supervisor and told him I'd walked off the job and that he needed to send someone else. He wasn't happy about it, but he didn't push it. He knows I don't do that kind of thing without a good reason. Like I said, I never had before this. I drove past that house about a month later, and there was a for sale sign in the yard. I wasn't exactly surprised. I thought about calling the woman and asking if anything else had happened, but I decided against it. It wasn't really my business, and I didn't want to know.
So after talking to my best friend about weird stuff happening in my new house, We ended up talking about my parents' house, and I figured it might be time to open up this discussion and see whether anyone has experienced anything similar. My best mate mentioned how uncomfortable he felt being alone in my room. He described it as feeling heavy, or like there was some kind of wall you passed through when you walked in. So this is all about my experiences with that room. Just to preface, I have never had any encounters in any other room in the house. My parents lived in their semi-detached house for as long as I can remember. It was just my parents, me, and my 2 older sisters. It was only a 3-bedroom house, so for a while when I was really young, I slept in my parents' room, which was the biggest, while my sister stayed in the smallest and medium rooms. I remember never being scared of the dark at that point, and I was never really bothered by anything at night. I suppose that might have been because I had my parents nearby to keep me safe. A few years later, we all switched rooms. I got the smallest room, my parents took the medium room, and my sister shared the biggest one. I was never bothered by the dark or walking around at night or going to bed by myself. Then my sisters started moving out, so my parents took the big room again. I moved into the medium room and the smallest one was turned into a nursery for my little brother who was on the way. I stayed in the medium room for the rest of the time I lived in the house until I moved out. One other thing about that room was that it had the attic hatch in it. I was never allowed up in there because my parents said it was too small, even though I was desperately curious to see it. My bedroom was also directly opposite the stairs, which may or may not matter, but I thought it was worth mentioning. This was when I started to realize that I had a fear of the dark, or so I thought. For years I was terrified of it, right up until I was 17. That seems like a long time to be afraid of the dark, but I eventually realized it was not really the dark itself, it was something in the room. At night, I would get so anxious about going to bed that I would not even put my head on top of the stair railing because I was sure something would touch it. In my mind, it was always this long-fingered, skinny hand laying on top of mine. I never actually saw it happen, but could feel something on the back of my hand, and that image would immediately come into my head. I could never look into my room while walking up the stairs because I had the horrible feeling that something was staring back at me, even though I never saw any eyes. I hated getting up in the middle of the night if I were thirsty or needed the bathroom because of that same presence. It was the classic keep your feet under the blanket or the monster will get you feeling. Again, I never saw this thing directly, but whenever I felt it nearby, an image of a long, thin hand or black mass would appear in my head. It never had a face, just a black shape with long arms and hands and a head. When I turned 17, I still felt that presence, but my health took a turn and I ended up in the hospital for a while. When I returned, the feeling in the room had changed. I felt calmer there, the presence was still there, and at night I still felt the hand on mine sometimes, but it was different. It was like I understood it was not there to hurt me, even though I still did not understand why it was there at all. I never felt that way in any other room. When I moved out at the age of 21, my last night at my parents' house felt warm somehow, and the presence was really calm. I felt like I needed to thank it for just being there. It was such a strange experience, like a strange weight had lifted. Now, my little brother has moved into that room, and I feel like I can't even enter it. In my parents' house, the bedroom doors are always open, and I am asked all the time to go and grab things from different rooms. But in my old room, my brother's new room, the presence is there again. It almost feels like it looked after me while I was in the room, and after I left, it became attached to my little brother. I can almost feel it around him when he's in there. It still stays in that room, and it never feels like that anywhere else. I'm not really sure what this is. It never seemed human to me. Has anyone else had an experience like this? Is it common for these things to seem non-human? What was it? And why was it just attached to one room?